We'll call the meeting to order. We're here today televised in public pursuant to the order of reference Thursday, November 3rd, 2011, Bill C-20, an act to amend the Constitution Act 1867, the Electoral Boundaries Readjustment Act, and the Canada Elections Act. And we're fortunate to have the Minister here today. Minister, it's great to have you. I understand you have an opening statement. If you can, we'll start with that. If you'd like to introduce the people that are with you and start with your opening statement, and then we'll go to rounds of questioning.
Very good.
Minister, I leave it to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and with me are members from the department from PCO, Matthew Lynch and François Morin. And I do have opening comments, if I may begin. Mr. Chair, I am pleased to be before this committee this morning to discuss Bill C-20, Fair Representation Act. Bill C-20 delivers on our government's long-standing commitment to move the House of Commons towards fair representation. In particular, it reflects our government's three distinct promises to provide fair representation by allocating an increased number of seats now and in the future to better reflect population growth in Ontario, British Columbia, and Alberta, maintaining the number of seats for smaller provinces, and maintaining the proportional representation of Quebec according to its population. In my opening remarks today, I would like to provide an overview of the bill's key elements. I will then be pleased to take any questions that you may have. The representation of the provinces in the House of Commons is readjusted every 10 years using a formula established in Section 51 of the Constitution Act 1867. The current formula dates to 1985 and was designed to provide modest increases to the House of Commons. While the 1985 formula has been successful in limiting the size of the House of Commons, it has created a representation gap for the faster-growing provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and Alberta. The combined effect of fixing the divisor at 279 in combination with the existence of the seat guarantees has prevented these provinces from receiving a share of the seats that is more in line with the relative share of the population. The formula in Bill C-20 is principled and is a reasonable update designed to bring those provinces closer to representation by population, while at the same time maintaining the seat counts of the slower-growing provinces and ensuring that Quebec maintains a level of seats that is proportionate to its population. In fact, the Fair Representation Act brings every single province closer to representation by population. The bill would set the electoral quotient for the 2011 readjustment at 111,166, which reflects the average riding population prior to the last seat readjustment in 2001, increased by the simple average of provincial population growth rates. Once the initial allocation of seats has been determined on the basis of that quotient, the Senate floor and the grandfather clause would be applied. The Fair Representation Act then provides the formula apply a new representation rule. If a province becomes underrepresented as a result of the application of the updated formula, additional seats will be allocated to that province so that its representation will equal its share of the population. Based on population estimates, Quebec will be the first province to receive new seats in order not to become underrepresented by the operation of the updated formula. That said, the representation rule applies to all provinces that may find themselves in this scenario. A further update to the formula is to base the allocation of seats among the provinces on Statistic Canada's population estimates. There is a reason for that. The population estimates provide a more accurate picture of Canada's total population. The population estimates adjust to account for the census net undercoverage, that is, the number of people who were not enumerated during the census, as well as the overcoverage coming from those who were enumerated twice. The practical result of applying the new formula will be to add an additional 30 seats to the House of Commons, for a total of 338. In terms of the provincial breakdown, Ontario will receive 15 new seats, Alberta will receive 6 new seats, and British Columbia will receive 6 new seats. Quebec will receive 3 new seats as a result of the new representation rule, which will ensure that its seat total does not come under the number of seats proportionate to its population. Finally, the bill provides an adjustment to the formula in order to account for future increases in population counts following future censuses. For the 2021 and each subsequent readjustment, the bill provides that the electoral quotient will be increased by the simple average of provincial population growth rates since the preceding readjustment. In addition to the updated formula for allocating seats, Bill C-20 also proposes amendments to the Electoral Boundaries Readjustment Act. The changes proposed in the bill aim to streamline the timelines in the current boundary readjustment process. For example, the independent boundary commissions would be established no later than 6 months following the census. The timeline for the commissions to produce their reports would be streamlined from 12 to 10 months, with a possible 2-month extension. The time period for the implementation of the representation order would be reduced from 12 months to 7 months, and the notice period for public hearings by commissions will be reduced from a minimum 60-day period to a minimum 30-day period. There will be no change to the timelines relating to the parliamentary phase of the electoral boundary process, during which time parliamentarians and Canadians are able to provide their comments on the initial reports of the boundary commissions. And most importantly, Canadians will continue to have the same opportunity to voice their opinions on boundary changes during public hearings held by the commissions. The updates to the Electoral Boundaries Readjustment Act follow recommendations made in the past by this committee, the Chief Electoral Officer, and the Lord T. Commission. To conclude, the Fair Representation Act addresses the unacceptable underrepresentation of some provinces and fulfills our government's long-standing commitment to move towards fair representation. The updated seat allocation formula contained in the Fair Representation Act moves every single province towards representation by population. Thank you, and I look forward to responding to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Minister. We'll start our 7-minute round. Mr. Lukiski, you're first.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for appearing here. We've got a few questions, but I guess primarily I want to go back to something you said in your opening statement, where you said that the population estimates provide a more accurate picture than a population than census. Now, if the intent of the bill is to try and get to a representation by population formula that is more accurate of the population, I mean, that's the key right there is, you know, what is our population? Can you give either assurances to the committee or explain why you're suggesting that population estimates would be more accurate than the census data that we would be receiving?
Okay, thank you, and that is very important. Our commitment is to come forward with a formula that is fair for all provinces and is principled and is based on actual populations. The numbers that we're using there are the best data available for representation updates, and that includes using the census data for boundary readjustment. So we're using the best numbers available at each stage in this process. In determining the actual populations of the provinces, we're using the population estimates. These are the same numbers, same population estimates. These are the numbers that are used for the Federal Provincial Equalization Program, same numbers that are used for the Canada Health transfers, same ones used for the Canada Social transfers. So these are the best, this is the best data available for the population figures of the provinces themselves. Now, when we get down to the riding by riding, street by street level detail, the census will be used for that because the census is good for that detail. So we're using the best data available at each stage.
Thank you, Minister. Now, just so I'm clear, then the population estimates, you say that those estimates are more accurate, but I still haven't heard where do they come from. Is that are those numbers compiled by Stats Canada or some other independent group?
Absolutely, they are Statistics Canada, and maybe PCO can.
Certainly. Statistics Canada produces quarterly population estimates. They've been doing that since 1971. And there's a statutory requirement under the Federal Provincial Fiscal Arrangements Act for Statistics Canada to produce an annual population estimate to allocate funding for the programs the Minister referred to. Basically what they attempt to do is to correct for the census net undercoverage, which the Minister referred to, through a series of statistical methods, and then they update the estimates based on population trends, based on information from provincial vital statistics and citizenship and immigration.
Thank you. Minister, this C-20, as we know it, is the latest in an iteration of Rep by POP bills that actually this committee has seen in years past. Maybe you could give a little update to the committee on why the formula used in this bill is superior, in your opinion at least, to some of the other bills that we have seen at this committee in terms of Rep by POP.
Sure. So our commitment was to bring forward changes to the formula that, one, would address the fact that Alberta, BC, and Ontario are underrepresented. Their populations have grown, and they're underrepresented in the House of Commons. We also made a commitment that we would maintain the number of seats for the smaller provinces, and also to make sure that Quebec stayed represented equal to its population. The fact is that C-12, the previous bill, used numbers that are out of date. The population figures that were used in that formula are out of date. So C-20, this one, has new numbers, new population figures that are up to date because a number of years have passed. There's also a representation rule that's an addition in this bill, that if any province goes from fair representation or overrepresentation and becomes underrepresented because of applying, because of the redistribution process, we would add seats to that province to bring them back up to fair representation equal to their population. It would not be fair for a province to be fairly represented today and then become underrepresented because we've fixed a wrong somewhere else and then hurt that province. So any province, that would apply to all provinces. And the first province to benefit from that is going to be Quebec. And this bill also responds to population growth. And there's the divisor changes in order to respond to population growth now and in the future as well. And also we've streamlined the process for the electoral redistribution process. We've streamlined that process, and so these are the changes that have evolved after the last bill was presented. And at the end of the day, this bill fulfills the commitments that we've made, and it brings every province closer to representation by population.
Minute and a half.
When you say that the current formula proposed in Bill C-20 would ensure that if various provinces see their populations increase in the future, the formula would deal with that in an effective manner. When does that occur? I mean, how often would we be looking at population changes? Would it be based on a 10-year period like the census, or would it happen more frequently than that?
And that doesn't change. Currently, right now, it's every 10 years when the census comes out, the boundaries are looked at, and that doesn't change. It'll happen every 10 years. So that process is the same, and there'll be an update that happens every 10 years, and this formula will be applied at every 10 years, based on the population numbers from Statistics Canada.
Thank you.
Okay, good little one if you got it.
Well, just a quick one, because I hear it from my constituents all the time. We're talking about adding 30 more seats in the House of Commons. Physically, what can the House of Commons accommodate in terms of getting more MPs into the chamber?
There's actually a study done in 1996, and so the number, this formula has reasonable growth, and there's the current size of the House of Commons can accommodate members of parliament for decades to come. And the 1996 study said that the current House of Commons can accommodate 374 members of parliament. And with this formula, which has reasonable growth, we won't see that for decades.
Great. Thank you, Minister. It's nice to know I'll still fit. Mr. Christopherson, you're next. 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for appearing today. Again, as I've said before, we see this as an improvement. Previous bills had no seats for Quebec, and we're at least we've broken that barrier. I'm interested in your comment on the difference between the previous bill and this bill, but I'll come back to that in just one moment. I do want to focus, and Mr. Lekuski was good enough to open up the discussion around that formula change, because I want to be very clear about the change in the formula. I've heard everything you've said, so I won't repeat the questions and have you repeat the answers. But my one question would be, if this is an improvement and more accurate, then why wasn't it used before? Like, why all of a sudden are we seeing a modification to the formula and components of the formula have changed? And I hear you saying it's better, but my comment would be, if it's so obviously better on something this important, with the number of intelligent people over the years that have been looking at these files, why now do you believe this is an improvement as opposed to it's in there for convenience for the government because the math works better? You see my question, and I'm trying to be upfront about it.
Yeah, and you know what? Frankly, this isn't new. Like I said, these are the same numbers, population estimates that are used and have been being used for the Federal Provincial Equalization Program. Those are the numbers used. Same numbers used for Canada Health Transfer. Same numbers used for Canada Social Transfers. So these numbers have been used, are being used now, and they are the best numbers, the best data to use to determine the population of the provinces. It's being used before.
I hear that, Minister, and I realize they've been applied in other areas, but they haven't been applied in this formula. And we have dealt with these kind of formulas before, and now all of a sudden the government of the day is saying, hey, we found a magic number that makes the formula work even better. It's more accurate. And I'm just asking, if that's the case, why hadn't someone thought of this before now?
It's not about a magic number. It's about a good practice being used on this formula. It's about an existing, established good practice that is now being used on this formula, and we're still using the census data itself for the actual details of the boundary distribution. So it's just moving forward with good practices that have been used by the government.
Okay, one more question on this, Minister. I don't want to belabor it, but these formulas existed before. This is not something new. This calculation was used, as you say, in transfer payments, other very important matters to Canadians, particularly the provincial and federal government. So I'm just curious as to why all of a sudden, I realize you didn't make up the number from thin air, but you did pull it from somewhere and included it in the formula in a way that wasn't done before. And so, I mean, I'm hoping we'll get a chance to bring in experts, bureaucrats, academics, others who will answer too. But I am seeking your thoughts on why all of a sudden, Minister, does this government think, well, we like this number over here, we use it elsewhere, we'll plug it in here because why? That's my question. Because why? I hear you saying well, go ahead, please.
I can't account for somebody, looking at this 10 years ago in a previous government. I can tell you, for us, it was a matter of looking at what are the best numbers, what would be the most accurate. And when we looked at what are the numbers used for the equalization program, what's being used for the Canada Health Transfer programs, the same population figures that the provinces are saying, yes, that's the right way to go, that's accurate, then that's when we determine that's the most accurate. Those are the numbers we should be using.
I'm going to move on, but I could respond to you that you could do it the other way around and say that you're going to change the other formulas using the one we used for seat calculations because it's so important, so we'll start using that for transfer payments rather than the other way around. What I'm looking for is a definitive answer that says this is a more accurate, it makes for a better formula, and it'll be backed up by academics and others who have no political agenda.
I'm sure you'll get those witnesses in, but if the department has that
okay, brief, please.
Sure. So, I mean, there's further detailed information about this on StatsCan's website. The concept of census net undercoverage is fairly well understood among statisticians, and the population estimates are primarily more accurate because they do account for that census net undercoverage.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll get a chance to go into it further. I just wanted to get your comments on the record, Minister, and we now have that. So I thank you. I want to revisit, you mentioned earlier that the difference between your previous bill and this bill was that we have newer numbers. Again, I'm hoping we'll get a chance to get this verified through witnesses, but I've made the argument that our bill is better because it's got more seats using your old bill. I just, on the record, your comment on why there's fewer seats for my province of Ontario and fewer seats for BC in this formula than there was in the previous.
The previous bill that you have said that you've based your bill on actually had, like I've said, had numbers that are outdated. One example of that, it used an average riding size of 108,000. Those numbers were based back in 2006 and don't account for any increases in population since then. So that would make those numbers outdated. And so the bill currently actually adjusts for population growths. And so if your divisor is larger because your population is different, you will have different numbers in the seats. Those seat projections that were in the last bill were not guaranteed seats. They were just projections based on population figures available at the time, and also it would have been based on the next census numbers coming out. So any of those numbers that were in that bill were just projections.
All right. You can appreciate
the numbers in this bill are certain. They are certain because they're based on existing best population figures.
30 seconds. No, I'll wait for the second round.
Great. Mr. Garneau?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. I understand the underlying principles in this exercise, and I share with you the need for fair representation for each province based on changing population. However, I do see a major problem with C20. You went from 308 to 338 MPs. In other words, you added 30 seats to the House of Commons.
The added cost of such an inflationary measure. In my opinion, the government's new proposal sends the wrong message to Canadians, that it wants to increase the number of politicians while it slashes the public service and the services that are provided by them. It doesn't make any sense. In these days of financial restraint, Parliament must show the lead. Now, we all know that the number of MPs cannot keep growing forever. That's a discussion that comes back all the time. We already have a higher MP to population ratio than the norm in many democracies. In the United States, as we all know, there are 435 representatives for a population that is about 9 times bigger than Canada's. To my knowledge, Canada is the only federation that deems it necessary to go through this exercise of increasing the number of federal MPs every time there's a need to rebalance regional representation in Parliament, roughly every 10 years. This doesn't make sense, and it's an unsustainable practice. We must put a stop to it, and this is a good time to do it. We can rebalance the House's seat allocation in order to address the needs of the provinces. Parliament has the power to do that, and it is something that I think is particularly important to do at this time. I'd like to, if I may, draw your attention to a document from this committee from 1994, when they were looking at Electoral Boundaries Readjustment Act, a similar exercise to what we're going through now. And it was a dissenting opinion offered by 3 Reform MPs at the time, one of whom is very well known. And he was arguing for the fact that we didn't need to increase the number of MPs, that this was not a good practice. And if I can quote a little bit, a smaller House offers considerable cost savings, less government, and fewer politicians. And clearly this is what Canadians want. Another quote here, advancements in communication technology have allowed downsizing and increased efficiencies in the private sector, but also must be realized by government. And a final quote, Canadians are already amongst the most overrepresented people in the world. Of course, that MP is now the Prime Minister of this country. So I'd like to know why you did not take this opportunity, because it can be done, to keep the level at 308 and yet at the same time to achieve the fair representation which we all support.
And you said that you support fair representation, and it's important that the provinces that are underrepresented and significantly underrepresented, and existingly they will continue to be underrepresented. We need to close that gap. Every Canadian expects their vote, to the greatest extent that possible, should have equal weight across the country. The fact is that we have seat guarantees. There's the Senate clause, the grandfather clause, and the Liberal plan of changing that and just moving seats around that we have, the existing seats that we have, the Liberal plan would actually have to pick winners and losers. So essentially the Liberal plan would have Quebec lose seats, Newfoundland and Labrador would lose seats, Nova Scotia would lose seats, Saskatchewan would lose seats, and Manitoba would lose seats to compensate for Alberta, BC, and Ontario. We don't think that's fair. We don't think it's fair to move those seats around. We don't think it's fair to do what the Liberals would do, to pick winners and losers. So what we have proposed is a principled formula that's fair for all provinces, brings every province closer to representation by population. It's a formula that's actually applicable to all provinces.
Thank you. But if I told you that you could do it 308 and still have the same percentages that you've ended up with, would you take my word for it?
What you're saying is that you would pick winners and losers. You would take seats away from Quebec. You would take them away from Newfoundland, Labrador, from Nova Scotia, from Saskatchewan and Manitoba. That is what you were saying. And that's also, as the Liberal plan, what you're not being clear about, is who would you take the seats away from?
What I'm saying, Minister, is that we would end up with the same percentages as you're ending up with, the 338 for each of the provinces, very, very close to each other, and yet keep the House size at 308. Now, this would require us to remove the grandfather clause which existed, which preserved the number of seats that each House that each province had. But this is an exercise that I believe we need to get to, and yet we still end up with the same percentages that you have achieved with 338, and yet we save the Canadian taxpayer, and we get rid of a problem that's going to come back every 10 years. So I'm wondering why you didn't look at it. And that's something the Parliament can do. It doesn't require us to reopen the Constitution.
Because we committed that our formula to update the seats to address the underrepresentation gap would be fair for all provinces, unlike the Liberal plan that would take seats away from the smaller provinces. We find that to be unfair. The other things I will address is your kind of concern about seat growth in the future. Yes, there's 30 seats being added now to address the underrepresentation gap. That's a big jump, but it addresses it quickly. In the future, with current projections, in 2021, there'll be 11 seats added, only 11 seats, and in 2031, only 5 seats will be added under the current population projections. So your concern about, this huge House of Commons growth is not, it's unfounded. There's reasonable growth with this formula. This formula gives a balance between adding seats to the underrepresented provinces, but also having reasonable growth to the House of Commons.
Et vous ne pensez pas que c'est d'envoyer le mauvais message aux Canadiens?
Don't you think we're sending out the wrong message to Canadians? We're cutting back in the public service and cutting back on services to save money. At the same time, Parliament is growing, is becoming larger by adding 30 new seats. Are you setting the right example for Canadians during a period when we're all tightening our belts?
Would be saying to certain provinces that you have to be underrepresented because your population has grown and you will continue to be
Minister,
underrepresented.
I will tell you...
That would be the wrong message. And the wrong message would also be to telling the smaller provinces, like the Liberals will be doing, is to take seats away from them to give to the other provinces. That would be the wrong message.
Just let me say one last time. We achieve the same percentages as you achieve.
By taking seats away from the
with
smaller
308.
provinces.
Thank you, Mr. Garneau. Your time is complete. Mr. Albert?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. And I want to thank you for a really good summary of what this bill actually does. I think your opening comments clarified for a lot of Canadians some of the confusion that may be out there, and especially you highlighted the ongoing, long-standing commitment of our government in terms of allocating increased seats and now and into the future to better reflect the population growth in Ontario, BC, and Alberta. And then, in spite of Mr. Garneau's protests, this second one is so important, that we maintain the number of seats for smaller provinces. There's no way that we can get to proportional or to representation by population anywhere close to it by the formula that he's suggesting. And finally, to maintain the proportional representation of Quebec according to its population. Now, in your opening comments, Minister, you indicated that the bill would set the electoral quotient for the 2011 readjustment at 111,166. And I have some numbers in front of me from some of the ridings not too far from me that are significantly higher than that. Brampton West, 170,000 constituents. Oak Ridge's Markham, 169,000. I could go on. There are 10 different ridings here, all of them over 133,000 in population. Now, at the same time as we have those ridings which have such high populations, we have other ridings in the country that are around 40,000 or less. So my question basically, is it possible to ever get to a total representation by population under the current system? And this proposal that you have here, to me, seems to address as best we can, recognizing the previous guarantees, to get closer to representation by population for these ridings, which currently the constituents in these ridings, their vote is worth 1/4 or less of the constituent in a riding with 40,000. So could you address that?
Sure. And you're right. I mean, when you mentioned Brampton West at over 170,000 people, that was in 2006, probably close to 180, 190,000 now. And true representation by population, with the system that we have, with the very large country and the varying populations that we have, and some of the seat guarantees that we have in the Constitution, would actually require over 900 members of Parliament in the House of Commons. The House of Commons cannot accommodate those, and also Canadians wouldn't. Canadians don't want that. That's not acceptable. What we have put forward is a formula that moves all provinces towards representation by population in a principled manner. So every province is brought closer to representation by population. It's a formula that's fair for all provinces, and it maintains the seats for those smaller provinces, so their representation is protected.
Okay. Well, I don't have another question. I simply want to make the observation that as members of Parliament, we are called upon by our constituents to offer a lot of services to them: immigration, employment insurance, intervention, CPP, and all of that. And I can't imagine an MP who has 40,000 constituents comparing his or her workload to a member of Parliament that has 170,000 and still feel that they're actually meeting the needs of their constituents. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and I just simply want to applaud you and your ministry for coming up with a very principled approach that will address this now and into the future. Thank you.
Christopherson to start. We're in a 4-minute round at this moment.
4-minute round. Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. First of all, I want to just mention, any comment on that, but I think that I would hope you'd acknowledge that it is a complex matter when we're dealing with these formulas, particularly when we're dealing with 06 census in some of the formulas, which was your original bill. We're looking at the 11 census, which won't show until February of 2012, and then we have this new item that you brought in using from the transfer payment. So it's very complex, and I'm hoping the government's going to be agreeable to give us enough time to bring in the experts to get to the bottom of it, so we can satisfy ourselves that indeed this is an improvement. Secondly, just a brief comment. I hear where the Liberals are coming from, but I got to tell you, unless we're going to change to an American system where you accept from the get-go that some are going to go up and some are going to go down, I'm at a point as a former Ontario cabinet minister that I want my province to get as many seats as they're entitled to, and this only gets us closer. I mean, Ontario still doesn't have all the seats it should have, and we feel the same way about all the other provinces. So I hear what the Liberals are saying, but I got to tell you, in all honesty, it sounds more like a nice, safe, free parking spot to go to as opposed to getting into the cut and thrust of some of this, because it's complicated and it's difficult. But I'll leave that for the cut and thrust. Third, I want to get down to the issue of Quebec. As you know, we've taken a position that we believe that to give effect to the November 27, 2006 motion, where the House, close to unanimous, recognized that the Quebecois forms a nation within a united Canada, we've taken a position that to nation build, to give respect to that, to give assurances that Canada is not interested in assimilating the culture of the Quebecois and see it disappear, that we want it to be strong within Canada, recognizing that the Quebecois know that being strong in Canada means they're strong in North America. And so I'm curious as to why you wouldn't take that extra step, because it was your government that brought in that motion, and give effect to it, and once and for all assure the Quebecois that their place in Canada is assured going forward. Why would your government not take that stand and show that respect and build in that protection going forward?
Our commitment for representation in the House of Commons is clear. It's a long-standing commitment from this government and the party that the formula we bring forward, a principled formula, would be fair for all provinces. All provinces. Quebec, after this formula is applied, will have 23% of the population, and Quebec, after this formula is applied, will have 23% of the seats in the House of Commons. That is fair. Their representation will equal their population, and that's very fair. At the same time, every province is brought closer to representation by population. It's important as a government that we govern for all Canadians.
No, I hear that,
and being very fair.
Minister,
to
but what you're suggesting is that the application of equality to Quebec, given everything else, is an okay standard for you. That there's nothing unique. That motion meant nothing. Is that what the government is saying? That was it to pacify Quebec? Did it not really mean anything? Because when we look at that motion, we think it meant something. And to give effect and protection to that, that's why we think that we ought to be moving to the 24.35. All I'm hearing you say, Minister, with great respect, is that everybody's equal. Well, Yukon's not equal. PEI is not equal in terms of their Senate seats and their House seats. We have asymmetrically country anyway. So why would the government who brought in that important motion, that historic motion, not take the next step and give some meaning to it so that there's real protection behind it?
Mr. Christopherson, I'll let the minister answer.
The fact is, this is a seat redistribution formula and a process. It needs to be based on populations. We made a commitment that Quebec's population will be equal, Quebec's representation will be equal to its population, and we follow through on that commitment. Quebec will have 23% of the population and 23% of the seats in the House of Commons. That's equal, and that's fair.
Mr. Christopherson, your time is complete. You may get another chance. Mr. Reid?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. I just have to respond to Mr. Christopherson's comments. I haven't gone back and reviewed the records of the debate in 2006. I do not recall anybody saying at that time, whether from the New Democrats or any other party, that the purpose of this motion or one of the outcomes of this motion ought to be that in the future, people in my province, in the riding that I represent, should always be proportionately underrepresented vis-a-vis people in Quebec. On the contrary, the foundational deal, the foundational constitutional arrangement of Canada states that we will have representation by population in the House of Commons. And specifically, it stated that it would be based upon a fixed number of for Quebec and every other province being calculated from Quebec. Now, we've violated that arrangement many times. Many provinces are now overrepresented, others are underrepresented. Quebec alone is fairly close to what the original promise was. I think the idea, Minister, that we ought to fix and establish that Quebec will always be neither over nor underrepresented is to be commended. It's, if, in some sense, the only defensible remaining part of the process that we have achieved now, and I applaud you for entrenching it. So my congratulations to you. What I actually wanted to ask, though, related to Mr. Garneau's question or proposal, I simply do not accept his math. He says that we can set aside the arrangement in the current formula that says that provinces are guaranteed no fewer seats than they currently have, and in so doing we can achieve with 308 members of Parliament a formula or a representation level that is effectively representation by population. I dispute that because while it is true that you could lower Nova Scotia from 11 seats to 10 seats before you hit its Senate floor, which is not amendable by us, you could lower Saskatchewan and Manitoba to 6 seats each if you wanted to do this. You could lower Quebec to 24 seats, take away 2/3 of its seats. You could do all these things. You could take away 1 seat from Newfoundland. You cannot take away any seats from Prince Edward Island and its 4 seats that it currently has, which means that under his formula, the gap in representation between the people I represent, who, I might add, live in an area larger than PEI, there's 117,000 of them currently. There would be more than 117,000 of them under his formula, and ridings in PEI would still have 35,000 members. So I submit that what the Liberals are suggesting is simply not supported by the facts, and I guess I'm inviting your comment on that, Minister.
Absolutely, it isn't. They're essentially playing with the numbers and really not being upfront with Canadians of what their real plan is. All they're saying is, well, let's keep the 308. The fact is, the Liberal plan would have to pick winners and losers, and the losers in their plan would be Quebec, Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. The Liberal plan would take seats away from those provinces and give them to, I suppose, Alberta, BC, and Ontario. We don't think that's fair. We made a commitment that we would maintain the seats for those provinces.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, then let me just ask, I assume what you were struggling with, Minister, was trying to achieve as much representation by population as you could, while at the same time trying to reflect the practicalities of, I guess, essentially the idea that there are some limits as to how many members you can put in the House. I'm kind of guessing here because I just did the math based on PEI and came up with the 900 members you did. So does that essentially reflect the spirit of what you were trying to achieve?
Yeah, the idea was is to follow through on our commitment that we would bring in more members of Parliament to address the underrepresentation gap for Alberta, BC, and Ontario. Same time, we want to maintain the seats for the smaller provinces. Some of those provinces are already guaranteed under the Constitution or with the Senate floor legislation. So that's already set in stone, and you can't change those. We also made a commitment that Quebec will be continue to be represented proportionally to their population. So within that framework is this formula. It's a principle. It is applied to the entire to the entire country, and it brings every province closer to representation by population.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Reid. Mr. Kerr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Minister, I do want to commend the work that you and your staff have done. I think we all watched kind of nervously, depending what part of the country we were from. I'm going to say that I sense unbounding enthusiasm around the committee for this direction, and I think it will go well. But I do want to take exception, and I'm surprised at Mr. Garneau's presentation. The counting was done with magic beans or something, because if I heard correctly, and I come from one of those small provinces that would be affected, and geographically, we've got to remember this country is spread out over huge domain, and geography and distance are incredibly important considerations, and membership, therefore, is particularly important to a lot of us. I would have expected Mr. Garneau would have shared that regarding Quebec, to watch it be devastated under the formula. What I would like you to specifically answer as best you can that he would not answer is how you keep 308 seats and redistribute seats from others without doing it from others, because that's how I interpreted what he said. So if you can grade up the number thing, I think I'd like to have it on record and share it with our residents back home to make sure we understand where the Liberal Party is coming from in this important endeavour.
There is no way to redistribute 308 seats without taking them away from some province. Somebody has to lose seats. You can't just, if you're moving the puzzle around, they have to be moved from one province to the other. And that's one thing that the Liberals aren't being upfront about, is who would they take the seats away from? And if you're going to move it according to population, and you're looking at the grandfather clause of 1985 is what they're saying, Quebec, Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba would lose seats. They're essentially being picked on by the Liberals to take seats away from them and give them to the other provinces. We don't think that's fair. We made a commitment that we would maintain the seats for those provinces, at the same time address the underrepresentation for the faster growing provinces. Every Canadians expected that their vote should have equal value to the greatest extent possible. That's what we've done, and we brought forward this formula that is fair for all provinces. That is a commitment that we made, and we follow through with this formula.
That's all.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Kumar.
Mr. Minister, I want to pursue some of the questions Mr. Christopherson asked in his opening round. This is the third incarnation of an attempt to arrange for redistribution of seats. Is that correct? Under your government?
I believe so.
Right. And then can you tell me exactly when this new formula was determined as to be the one that you were going to use?
essentially it comes back to a commitment, right? I mean, in the campaign, and it's very clear in our platform and what we ran on and all Conservatives ran on, are three things: that we would address the underrepresentation for the faster growing provinces, Alberta, BC, and Ontario. In the same time, we had said that we would maintain the seats for the smaller provinces, and also Quebec for their representation to be equal to their population. That's where the commitment comes from, and at the same time, if you have those parameters, your formula, the formula will just come from there, from that commitment. And
but it wasn't there
when I was made as a minister.
A month before the last election, you introduced C12. It did not. You weren't using the formula there. Certainly weren't recognizing the right of Quebec to have additional seats. So, when you say it was in your platform was, I'm sure, prepared somewhere in that period of time. When you introduced C12 in the just before the last election, April the 1st, I think it was, that you introduced it in 2010.
Okay.
Did you not know you were going to go to this new formula at that point?
That formula was the formula at the time. That was the formula C12 that was introduced at the time. This is a updated new formula with new population figures and has the representation rule in it, and it has the commitment to the smaller provinces. This is a new formula, essentially. It's updated.
Is it new or is it updated?
I'm sorry. Maybe you're not the right person to be asking these questions to. Maybe we need somebody with more technical knowledge. And I'm sorry, that's not meant as a slight, Mr. Minister. I'm having real trouble with this, and I'm sure you're...
I just don't see this to be a technical question. You're asking, that was the old formula under an old bill, and this is a new formula.
But we were using that formula for the transfer payments, certainly in April of 2010, weren't we?
Well, C12 did not have those the same figures as you're talking about for the transfer payments. Those are totally... It's absolutely different.
So but the formula, that formula... was available when C12 was introduced.
Sure. Yes, it was. It's been available for years.
So I go back to my initial question.
So you're saying the population estimates.
When did you decide
to use the population estimates is your question?
All right, if you want to go that way, yes.
Because the difference is using the best data available from Statistics Canada, which uses this population estimates, and that is in the new formula. It was not in the old formula. Correct.
You're absolutely certain of that. I'm sorry, Mr. Minister.
C12 did not use population
estimates. I know C12
estimates.
didn't, but the formula at that time, as it existed at that time, certainly had forecasts for what the population growth was going to be.
C12, the old formula or the old bill, had population figures based on only the census data. It was only based on the census data.
Which is the way we do it.
This bill is based on the best population figures available, which uses both population estimates from Statistics Canada and the census data. It uses the best population figures available at each stage.
That's Mr. Or 10 seconds.
I'll take the 10 minutes.
Yeah, I thought you might, but 10 seconds.
Yeah, I'll let it go.
Okay.
All right, great. Mr. Williamson?
Thank you. I actually want to go back and address some of the questions that were raised by Mr. Garneau, because at first blush it actually sounds quite attractive what he's suggesting, the idea that we can hold the line at 308 and still come out to a same approximate number we're at now. That's effectively what I believe the member is saying. But if you dig beneath the surface, I believe what he's suggesting is that Nova Scotia might lose a seat. All right, fair enough, 11 to 10 on a population of 900,000, not bad. New Brunswick, by contrast, would maintain its 10 seats because it has 10 senators on a population of 750,000. But the real hit would come to Manitoba and Saskatchewan, each with 14 seats. In order for this formula to work, they'd effectively have to be cut to 6 seats each. So they would go from 14 to 6, with populations of 1.2 and 1.1 million. That's the only way I see. Well, I'd like to see these numbers. You're throwing them out there, and I think it's incumbent on members, if they're going to put numbers out there, to back them up, because this is key. That suddenly, if we have 2 provinces with 6 seats in the House, 6 seats in the Senate, versus eastern provinces with 10 and 10, that would strike me as not at all equitable, let alone fair. And I'd like to get your comments on that, because it seems that would be problematic for the 1.1 and the 1.2 million people in each of those two prairie provinces?
You're absolutely right. I mean, the Liberal proposal, they're not being upfront with Canadians of what their actual proposal is. Their proposal is to take seats away from the smaller provinces. And it's unfair to do that. It's also unfair that they're not being upfront about which provinces would lose the seats and by how many. We maintain that they would keep those seats. This formula needs to be based on population figures, and it is the most reasonable way to get every province closer to representation by population without picking winners and losers and without taking seats away from the smaller provinces. So that is why this, based on population figures, the provinces of Alberta, BC, and Ontario are getting seats, and also Quebec is getting seats for them to maintain equal to their population.
May I ask as well, as far as you know, have these numbers come forward that have been suggested by Mr. Garneau today? Has there been a bill, or has he forwarded his caucus forwarded any numbers that would allow us to view these? Because he's disputing what seems to be simple math, and again, it makes for a good headlight. We can hold the line, save money, but at the end of the day, if it's huge disequilibrium between the provinces, I'm not sure it's much of a solution. So I'm curious to know if those numbers have ever come forward to you.
No, they've come forward with kind of an idea, but they really haven't. They haven't done the work. They haven't done the numbers behind it. Although I haven't seen it, so they haven't distributed any numbers to anyone that I know of, and they really haven't, like I said, been upfront with Canadians and said, here are the population figures, here are the seats that who would lose seats and who would gain seats. They have not done that. But looking at the numbers, but looking at the existing seats, it is not too difficult to determine from there who would lose seats, and I mean you've done the math right there. Of who would actually lose seats under their Liberal plan.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing more.
Mr. Lukiski.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Minister. I don't want to appear that we're all picking on our Liberal colleague here, Mr. Garneau, but I have to make comment. And I also want to address something that Mr. Comartin said, but primarily with Mr. Garneau's comments. You're quite right, Minister. I don't care how you slice and dice it. Under the Liberal plan, certain provinces, including my home province of Saskatchewan, would lose seats. And while he's correct in his statement that the guarantee that was provided in 1985 can be reshaped without having to open up the Constitution, it would cause immense problems constitutionally. Anytime you're going to start taking seats away or taking anything away from individual provinces is going to cause a constitutional crisis. There will be huge problems, and huge problems to pay both interprovincially and between the federal and provincial governments in future negotiations on any matter. So it's simply not on. That's why I know that our party, because we were, as Conservatives, all very well briefed going into the last campaign, that's why we guaranteed that there would be no change to the 1985 provision, that the seat count at that time would be preserved. So to suggest somehow that Canada would be better served by reducing the number of seats in various provinces, including Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Newfoundland, and others, is absolutely sheer folly. It just would cause so many problems. I don't think that we have enough time in this committee to totally contemplate them. So I congratulate you on sticking to the plan, the commitment that our party made during the last election campaign. With respect to my friend Joe's comments about looking back on Bill C-12 as compared to Bill C-20, I thought you explained well why C-20 was superior to C-12. It is a better formula, at least one that I certainly see as being a better formula. And I would just suggest to my friend opposite and others that things evolve. I mean, we've seen many times in parliaments past where similar bills have been introduced, and over time, those bills have improved. I mean, there have been changes, some subtle, some not so subtle. And I think in this case, taking into account the accurate information that is currently at our disposal, Bill C-20 better reflects the move towards representation by population. Will it ever be perfect? Of course not. I mean, population fluctuations are always going to occur. There's only going to be changes made every 10 years. We'll never get to a point where there will be exactly representation by population. But this bill certainly represents, in my view, a much better rep by pop from province to province as any bill previously. Mr. Christopherson mentioned his home province of Ontario. Well, this bill perhaps doesn't give exactly rep by pop for Ontario, but it's a lot closer than Bill C-12 would have been, and a lot closer than any bill prior to that. So I think it's a great attempt, and it better closes the gap between underrepresented provinces and those who were perhaps overrepresented. So, Minister, I would only ask you once again to make a comment on why Bill C-20 was introduced and why it was introduced at this point in time to address what I consider to be some grievances, rightful grievances in the past.
In under 5 seconds, Minister.
The NDP is concerned about why is this bill better. It is better, and I think we should applaud the fact that it's better. It brings every province closer to representation by population using the most up-to-date population figures from Statistics Canada. That's a good thing.
Thank you. Mr. Kumar, 4 minutes, and we should be finished.
Well, let me say that obviously we saw some improvement because you finally recognized, Mr. Minister, the need to recognize the historical significance of the reality of the role that Quebec plays in this country. So on that side of the bill, I don't want to go too far because you didn't go far enough in that regard, but that was certainly an improvement over what we had before. You just have to go a bit further. And in that regard, I'm sorry, I want to make one more point, maybe more to Mr. Lukiski than to you. You know, trying to rely on this formula when you gutted the census, and you know every objective standard says that the analysis of what has happened to the census material. I don't know how we're supposed to feel confident to rely on it on an ongoing basis for the future growth in the House. Anyway, that's just a comment. My questions are more around consultation, and not only with Quebec but with the other provinces. This change. So that you would add seats to the province of Quebec. When did you consult with Quebec about that, and similarly with other provinces? Or did you consult with any other provinces before that change was made?
Our position on representation in the House of Commons, it's not new. It's something that we have, it's a long-standing commitment by this government and this party. We regularly, as a government, speak to all provinces on a wide range of issues, and you know, we'll obviously look forward to working with the provinces going forward. At the end of the day, this is a principled formula that is based on population figures. This formula is based on Statistics Canada's best data available population figures. The provinces that received seats out of this formula, it's based on the number of people they have living in the province. That's strictly what it's based on.
This isn't question period.
Yeah, no, and I'm telling you.
This is committee, and committee, the procedures are, the conventions are that you answer the questions.
Sure.
My question is specifically on consultation, not on the formula. When did you consult with the provinces, and specifically on this change that Quebec was now finally, and that is a major change from your government standpoint, from the two incarnations before C-20. Major shift. You were adamant you weren't going to do that, and then sometime after the last election, in this government, in this parliament, you decided you were going to finally agree that some additional seats should go to Quebec. And what I'm asking you is, when did you consult with Quebec on that? When did you consult with the other provinces on that change?
We have been very clear, especially, and you mentioned the campaign. It's actually on page 63 of our platform that Quebec would be representation would be equal to its population, would be continue to have fair representation. Those commitments have been very, very open. We've been very clear about that, and we continue and always have had dialogue with the provinces on a wide range of issues. We have made these commitments. They're long-standing commitments. You yourself have been saying that this bill goes back to 3 different versions or something like that for a number of years. We follow through on those on our commitment that we made.
Versions didn't have any seats for Quebec.
And in the last campaign, we committed that Quebec would keep its representation according to its population, and so we follow through on our commitment to do that. this rule that's in the bill actually says that any province, it actually says any province, if they go to underrepresentation because of the redistribution, will come back up to representation equal to its population. That actually applies to every province because we wanted to be fair to all provinces in our approach.
Did you tell any of the provinces before the bill was introduced in the House and then made public, did you tell any of the provinces that you were going to make this change and I'm sorry, that you were going to give the province of Quebec 3 additional seats? Did you tell any of them before the bill was introduced in the House?
We'll give the minister a quick answer before we finish up.
The fact is that this bill is based on population figures. It's not a negotiation with provinces. You're somehow suggesting that there should be negotiations with provinces of who should get how many seats. It's based on population figures, and provinces receive the number of seats according to their population.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for coming today. Thank you all for coming today. Great round. I'm going to suspend for a couple of minutes while we change out witnesses. The Chief Electoral Officer is coming in next. call the meeting back to order. We're here today with the Chief Electoral Officer and Elections Canada, Monsieur Mélan. If we could introduce your guests, and I know you have an opening statement, and then we'll try and get in a round or two of questions. We will have to break a little early because we have some committee business we have to do before the top of the hour, but we'll give you as much time as we can today.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci et bon après-midi. Permettez-moi.
Good afternoon. I would like to start by introducing the people with me. Stéphane Perrault, Senior General Counsel and Senior Director, Legal Services Director. On my right, Mr. René Molnar, Deputy Chief Electoral Officer.
And second on my right, Mr. François Fauché, Directeur Exécutif, responsable.
Senior Director, Electoral Redistribution. Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to appear before the committee today to discuss Bill C-20, the Fair Representation Act. First, I will describe the role of the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada and other participants in the redistribution process. Second, I will address key changes under the proposed bill as they pertain to my office. My office plays an important but limited role in the redistribution process. The drawing of the new boundaries is solely the responsibility of the 10 independent electoral boundaries commissions created under the Electoral Boundaries Readjustment Act. My office is not involved in any of the decisions made by the commissions regarding the choice of electoral district boundaries or names. The Chief Electoral Officer does, however, perform certain functions that facilitate the redistribution process. Under the Act, the Chief Electoral Officer provides geographic information to the commissions, acts as a liaison between the commissions and the House of Commons, prepares the draft representation order, and prepares maps following the proclamation of the representation order. Furthermore, to help make the process more efficient and effective, Elections Canada has in the past provided administrative support to the independent commissions. This allows the commissions to focus on the substantive tasks they have been assigned by law. I intend to continue providing such support. While redistribution will officially start upon receipt of the census return from the Chief Statistician, currently expected as of February 8, 2012, Elections Canada has already begun its work. For instance, we've contacted the Chief Justice of each province, reminding them that they must appoint the chair of the commission for their province. As of now, the chairs of 9 out of 10 commissions have been designated by the Chief Justices. I started to inform members of Parliament on the redistribution process, notably this committee, and I reiterate my offer to provide caucus briefings upon request. In addition, I've contacted the Speaker of the House of Commons to inform him of his responsibilities under the Act, including the appointment of the 2 other members of each province's commission. I plan to meet with him in the coming weeks, in fact. This committee will also have an important role to play in the redistribution process. Once each commission completes its proposal and responds to feedback received during public hearings, it will submit a report describing the proposed boundaries to the Speaker through my office. The Speaker will then table and refer the reports to the committee, or if Parliament is not in session, will publish the reports in the Canada Gazette and send a copy to each member of the House of Commons for that province. MPs may file written objections with this committee for its consideration in the form of a motion signed by no fewer than 10 MPs. The committee then returns its own reports to the Speaker, who will forward them to the commissions through my office. Once the independent commissions have considered the objections raised before the committee, they then decide whether to modify the boundaries or district names before submitting their final report to the Speaker through my office once again. After having received the final reports, I'm required to prepare a brief representation order setting out the new boundaries as established by the 10 commissions. I transmit that draft representation order to the minister responsible under the Act, and the Governor and Council is required to issue a proclamation of the order within 5 days. Neither I, nor the Government and Council may make any alterations to the electoral district boundaries or names presented in the final reports. The representation order is to be published in the Canada Gazette no more than 5 days after the proclamation is made. Since the redistribution process will be launched in February, I would expect the initial reports from the smaller provinces to be submitted as early as September 2012, while the reports of the larger provinces will follow through the fall and winter. As was done in the previous redistribution, my office will hold a conference with the 10 electoral boundaries commissions in February 2012 and will extend invitations to members of this committee. This conference will be an opportunity to familiarize the 3 member commissions with the nature of their tasks.
4 key elements or changes provided by Bill C-20. First, the bill amends the representation formula found in the Constitutional Act of 1867. The new formula proposes to use the population estimates published by Statistics Canada on July 1st of the year of the decennial census, which means that the calculation of seats could be accomplished sooner. This change has no effect on my office. My role as Chief Electoral Officer is to use the formula as determined by Parliament to calculate the number of House of Commons seats allocated to each province. Second, the bill shortens the time frame within which the redistribution process takes place. Some of the changes are as follows. One is the possibility of establishing the Electoral Boundaries Commission sooner, within 60 days of the census return, as is the case now, or 6 months after the first day of the month in which the census is taken, whichever is earlier. Another is the earlier commencement of public hearings, at least 30 days after proposals are made, instead of the 60 days in the current Act. In addition, reports from each commission would be due in 10 months rather than the current 12 months, with a possible extension of 2 months rather than the current 6 months. Finally, Elections Canada would have 7 months rather than 1 year, as is currently in the case, to implement the new representation order before it would come into force for the next general election. The net effect of these changes include the earlier establishment of commissions, a 2-month reduction in the redistribution process, and a 5-month reduction in the implementation of the new boundaries. The impact of the reduced timelines on the implementation of the new representation order will be mitigated by a third key amendment regarding the reappointment of returning officers. Following the last redistribution, the boundaries of 90% of electoral districts change in some form. If we assume a similar proportion resulting from this exercise, Elections Canada would have to launch almost 300 competitive processes to appoint returning officers in the affected districts. Bill C-20 will allow the Chief Electoral Officer to reappoint returning officers based on merit, after consultation with the leaders of the political parties recognized in the House of Commons. This is consistent with the process that my office successfully used when the Chief Electoral Officer was first assigned the responsibility of appointing returning officer in December 2006. Excuse me. The fourth key change I would like to bring to your attention is the requirement in the bill for Elections Canada to prepare and print a full set of paper maps on completion of the Commission's initial reports. Currently, about 55 maps are included in the Commission's report stage to portray the proposed new boundaries. This bill would require Elections Canada to prepare and print some 400 individual maps at that stage. This would include 1 for each district, 1 for each province, and 1 for each city and metropolitan municipality, portions of which are in more than 1 proposed electoral district. Currently, the full set of maps is only printed following the issue of the proclamation declaring the representation order to be enforced. The bill also requires Elections Canada to provide electronic version of each of these maps to each registered political party. We are currently examining how this provision could be implemented with a limited impact on the redistribution timeline and its costs. Impact on resources. My office has begun to assess the impact of this bill on the resource requirement of the agency, particularly as it relates, first, to support for the redistribution process itself, Elections Canada return to readiness, the delivery of a general election using the new boundaries, and ongoing program activities in areas such as political financing and support for field personnel. Following the assessment, we may conclude that additional resources are required. In closing, I wish to indicate that the work of the Commission is set to begin under the current legislation as soon as February 2012. The early adoption of any legislative changes before that date would greatly facilitate the work of the Commission. Mr. Chair, my colleague and I would be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your opening statement. We'll start with a 5-minute round. Mr. Lukiski.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Michel Meron, for appearing here today. I want to make sure that we're perfectly clear here. You said that you and your officials would be prepared to begin implementation early February of 2012. Clearly, there's a lot of work. The intent, the objective at least of our government is to try and have these changes in force prior to the 2015 election. And while some may suggest that's 3.5 years away is plenty of time, I think you've laid out fairly effectively the amount of work that your office will have. And if I'm hearing you correctly, sir, you're saying that you can get this done, but you need the bill to be in your hands to begin work no later than early February. Is that question number one? Is that a correct assessment?
I think that would be the best scenario as far as we're concerned. Otherwise, we risk to have Commission have to restart their work if there's any further delay, because by statute, Commission need to start their work in February.
Okay, I'm glad we've got that clarified, because then, you know, if you work backwards, we then, since the scheduled date for rising for the end of the session is December 16th, and today is February or November 15th. We've got only a limited amount of committee dates to be able to examine witnesses and to get it through all 3 stages, get it out of committee, back to the House, from the House to the Senate. Royal assent has to be granted, and then and only then would be in a position to give you the completed bill so your office can begin its work. And I mention that just for the benefit of the committee here, to try and get a sense of the amount of work we have to do in a very limited amount of time. Have you confidence then, M. Menon, that given the amount of work that you've detailed here and some of the compressed timelines for some of the elements that your office will be required to do in terms of the administration of this, that gives you sufficient time so that new boundaries could be in place prior to the 2015 election?
Yes, provided it remains in October 2015. Yes, fixed date. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just ask you an overall assessment of the legislation brought forward, and I won't get into asking you your opinion of the political aspects of it, as some at this committee have tried to raise. But merely the fact that we, in an attempt to try and get better representation by population, have brought this bill forward. In your capacity of Chief Electoral Officer, beyond what you have stated in your presentation to us today, do you see any potential roadblocks or hurdles, unanticipated, perhaps unanticipated or unintended consequences of this bill that might be problematic for your office?
No, we are confident that we can, and the Commission will be able to proceed and implement the new formula and the remainder provisions of the legislation without too much difficulty, provided it's enacted in due time.
Final, how much time do we have?
A minute or so, a minute and 15.
Just to want to hone in on something that I know will be an issue with all MPs when it comes to the, particularly in the 4 provinces affected, where new boundaries have to be drawn and perhaps new names for the new ridings. You had mentioned in your presentation that MPs would have an ability, if they have objections to some of the proposed boundaries by the individual provincial electoral commissions, they would have an opportunity to, in effect, appeal them. Could you give a bit more
MPs will have two opportunities to make their view known around the proposed new delimitation. First, at the public hearings that must be held by a commission across the country in each of the provinces. Secondly, when the initial report of the commissions are provided to the House, Speaker will refer them to, my understanding, it will be this committee, where the committee will receive the objections of colleagues regarding any issue arising from the proposed new boundaries, and the committee will report their views on these objections. And the Commission, in due course, will be required to consider those views. Of course, they are not bound, but they will have to consider the objections that will be relayed by this committee.
Mr. Christopherson, 5 minutes, if you could, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I may have a moment or two left, and I'll give that to Mr. Comartin. Not likely the way I go on, but I'll do my best. Thank you very much. Good to see you again. I've done a lot of work together with you on a lot of files, and one more today. We're interested in the time frames, and you focused on that. Mr. Lekuski was strategic enough to raise that in his opening questions. Fair enough. The government has said that they have to have this bill done by the end of this year in order to do all the things that are necessary. Of course, the competing pressure is that we want to make sure that every province and territory that wants an opportunity to speak to this committee and this bill should be given that opportunity. There's a lot of experts we want to bring in. It's complicated formulas, so we're hoping to have enough time to do our work. I noted that you, in responding to Mr. Lekuski, you said that having this passed within the 5 weeks that the government has stipulated would be the best scenario. But that doesn't necessarily, those words, mean that if it's not done, the new seats can't be in place. So I would seek from you some sense of, and I know you can't comment on a political date versus a real-world date, which is where I'm going, but I'll frame it to you this way. What, in your opinion, would be the drop-dead date, the absolute latest, that you feel this bill has to be out of the House of Commons?
The best date...
Not best.
No.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
The best date...
You became a minister all of a sudden.
No, but the best date in our mind would be before the commissions are set up in February. Because otherwise, commissions will have to start their work. If the legislation comes into place later on, they will have to restart again. And that may generate, of course, additional costs, but also quite a bit of confusion, depending on what time the legislation comes into place. Again, if follow the transitional provisions that are in the bill, provide a variety of scenarios. Again, the Commission's work has to be completed at least 7 months before the next election date. Otherwise, the new boundaries won't apply.
Okay. Now, just so you know, we have indicated that it's our desire as the official opposition to do everything we can to ensure that, regardless of how we feel about the bill, that it's in place in time, because that's an overarching priority. But I guess I'm seeking from you, if, for instance, hypothetically, given the deadlines you're using, sir, if we took part of January, when the House isn't sitting to meet and do committee work, and passed this on the first day we returned, which would mean it would be out before the February census is released, would it still meet your needs?
Provided it's going through the Senate also before the census
yeah, okay, but I'm talking about the elected part of our governance. The rest of it will just pro forma. So if it passes the House, let me reiterate, if it passes the House, notwithstanding time and whatever at the Senate, but we could, as long as it's in your hands, in early February, by the time the census numbers are released, I believe it's February the 8th or 12th, that would be okay. That would still meet your need. And then what happens back in December, January is up to us.
The new formula will apply only after royal assent is given.
Understood.
So
Understood.
until a royal assent is provided, the Commission has to work with the current formula.
Well, given the fact that the Senate's appointed and the guy that appointed them controls what they do, the Senate part shouldn't be a problem. What really matters is what the elected people think. I hear your point. I accept that, respect it. But I'm just trying to make the case that should there be room needed to hear from the Premier of Saskatchewan or his or her designate, that we want to make sure that time is there. It would be equally wrong to not have whatever seats are going to be in place for the next election, but it would be equally wrong if that was done when there are provinces and territories that wanted an opportunity to have a say, but they didn't. Any comment on that?
That's a matter for the committee to consider.
I respect that. Thank you. Over to my colleague, Chair.
Sure. About 30 seconds, Mr. Kumar.
There you go, Joe.
Just quickly, assuming for a minute that C-20 wasn't before you as a law, the existing procedure, how long would it take for it to be completed?
Existing procedure?
Yes.
Currently, it would bring us around the spring of 2013.
So we've got a substantial gap. If we, Mr. Medan, if we simply had a quick amendment to the existing legislation that postponed the requirement, the timeline requirements that you've got, we have a lot of time where we can still be ready to implement this and the existing procedure.
Sorry, I should have said the fall 2013.
So it gives us about 2 years before the fall 2015 election.
Almost, but again, there's quite a bit of work after.
I understand that, but it's not 2 years worth of work.
Thank you. Mr. Garneau.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My question has to do with the timelines once again. And the question's already been asked, but what is your comfort level with the timeline? It assumes an election at a certain date. If that election were moved up for whatever reason, when would you start feeling nervous if the bill had not yet been passed? Well, look, to our mind, the preparatory work for the introduction of the new electoral boundaries would have to be completed by April 2014. Following that, it would become increasingly risky and dubious that we would be able to be ready for any election in 2015. If we accept it, then it would be ready by April 2014. Moving backward, you would want C-20 to be in effect at the latest when? Well, look, there are a number of scenarios set out in the Act. I can only repeat that from my point of view, my preference is for February, which would avoid duplication of effort and additional costs and a lot of confusion as well, because the Commission will start holding their hearings based on certain formulas, and then they would, if they had to redo all their work and hold new consultations, there could be confusion in Canadians' minds. Your role, your mandate under Section 14 under the electoral boundaries readjustment is to calculate the number of seats in each province, taking into account the Constitution Act, of course. We have been given some figures this morning. The Minister spoke about 15 new seats in Ontario, 6 in Alberta and BC, and 3 in Quebec. Does that fit with what you see? Well, it's in keeping with our understanding of the formula. Well, could there be any surprises? No, because the formula is based on the census figures, the July census figures, the provisional figures. So we know the population figure, and that can be applied. So the formula can be applied with certainty. the representation order comes into effect the first dissolution of the Parliament after 1 year after the proclamation, but C20 speaks about 7 months. Is that something you can live with? Yes. Yes. That follows up on a recommendation made by my predecessor a few years ago. It's the tightest timeline that we can meet for the introduction of the new boundaries. Finally, you have seen C20. Within your authority, are there some amendments that you would like to see made to the bill? Well, a number of technical amendments follow up on recommendations made by my predecessor. There were discussions with my office to ensure that these amendments could be made operational, so to speak. So I don't see any major difficulty except the question of timelines. Otherwise, I see no problem implementing the provisions of the Act effectively. Thank you.
4 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Miron, for being here today. In the middle paragraph of page 4 in your opening comments, you talk about the role of this committee in the redistribution process. In response to a question by Mr. Lukiski, you mentioned the 2 opportunities for members of Parliament to have input at the public hearings and then again presenting to this committee. But in your last paragraph, it says that for those MPs to file a written objection, it must be a motion signed by no fewer than 10 MPs. So I just want to clarify, as a member of this committee, those who are members will have input one-on-one, but those who are not members of this committee would need to have a motion signed by 9 other MPs for it to be heard by this committee. Am I interpreting that correctly, or have I misread that?
I believe it's by 10 for the committee to be listening or looking at the objection. They must receive a motion signed by 10 MPs.
Okay. All right. Well, that was new to me.
It's a requirement of the legislation.
Okay. Well, thanks for clarifying that. That certainly was new to me. Later on in your opening statement, you refer to the other changes that Bill C-20 brings into place, the establishment of electoral boundary commissions sooner in the process, the earlier commencement of hearings, and so on. And I just want to confirm that as you look through these changes, that these are ones that the electoral officials are able to easily implement?
It is doable. I think based on past experience, we estimate that maybe 3 provinces would require an extension of time of 2 months. But otherwise, it's doable within the time frame that's provided in the legislation.
And just to clarify, that's primarily based on size of those provinces. You indicated that the smaller provinces will probably be ahead of the game in terms of their reporting back. So can I assume that
historically it's been the larger provinces that took a little bit more time. But again, in the last redistribution exercise 10 years ago, they all did it within 12 months. 3 or 4 of them required a little bit over 11 months. So, and the Act provides that if they go over 10 months and under the new rules, they still can get the 2-month extension.
2-month extension. Okay, thank you. That's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You're all being very efficient with your time today. Mr. Christopherson, do you have...
over to Mr. Comartin.
Mr. Comartin, I'm sorry.
Mr. Miron, some of these timelines, I have to say I haven't gone through this myself back. This was the 2004 round. Dropping the public hearings, the commencement of public hearings from 60 days to 30 days means that people who are, whether constituents or members of Parliament, getting ready for those hearings have to do it in a much shorter timeline. I have to say to you, and speaking from the experience I had, and we were having difficulty with the adjoining riding because I was taking some of her ridings. She was an experienced member of Parliament. We had good riding associations. It still took us much longer than 30 days to get ready for those public hearings. I just don't know how practical it is to expect that we're going to get meaningful participation from the general public, from riding associations, or from members of parliaments when you're reducing that, or the government's reducing that to 30 days rather than 60. I was wondering if you could comment on that from your experience.
It still provides some leeway to the Commission. All the provision does is, under the current Act, the commissions have to wait 60 days. Now they only have to wait 30 days and see what are the submissions that are coming in. If there's enough, they can start their public hearings. Doesn't mean that everybody has to have filed their objections within 30 days. So those who would need a little bit more time can ask the Commission for more time, and pretty sure the Commission will agree to that.
So it would require whoever needed that extra time, whether an individual or a group, they would have to make a formal application to extend the time?
Now, those who want to make representation must give notice to the Commission 7 days before the start of the hearings.
And the same then for the reports from the Commission. I think you were responding to this in part to Mr. Albrecht's question. But the extension of the 2 months, is there criteria that you would see that would again, the applicant would have to meet, or the Commission would have to meet in order to get it extended? Like, how do you get the extra 2 months?
Quite flexible in that regard. If the Commission has need more time again within those 2 months, we will.
Is there any set criteria, I guess, is what I'm really asking?
Not that I'm aware of. No. Do we have any?
I'm going to go back to the timelines again. Right now, if we stay with the existing timelines, your office would have 2 years, roughly 2 years, to then get ready for the next election. I think I saw somewhere in your notes that you estimated 6 to 7 months is the timeline that you need in order to get ready once the seats have been redistributed. Am I right on that time?
7 months is the minimum time required before a general election takes place under the new limits.
All right. And in terms of that, I'm not sure I want to give you this opening, but what would be an average time that you would need, not just a minimum time? What would the average time that you would use in advance of a general election to get ready?
Following a redistribution?
Yes.
Again, in the past, it's been between 9 and 12 months, except for the previous redistribution in 2001, which was done with some heroic effort within 7 months.
All right. So if we pass the bill through the House really quickly in the next week or month, that backed up all of the existing legislation, backed up all the timelines they are required to meet. If we did that for a year, you'd still have a year's time to get ready for the election.
If it's delayed, yes, the Commission, depending where the commissions are at, because again, the whole process carries on. So if let's say the commissions complete all their works, send their report back, and they finalize their report, and we're ready to proceed with a proclamation order. If the royal assent is done after that, we would have to start from scratch. The next election would be done under the old formula.
You didn't understand my question.
Sorry.
But I'm out of time.
Mr. Reid.
Thank you. Actually, I was going to follow from Mr. Comartin's point. So with any luck, so we'll get the answer he was looking for. If the law isn't changed prior to February 1st, I think there's a statutory obligation for the Speaker to appoint 2 people to the commissions from each province, and for the Chief Justice of each province to appoint 1 person to chair the commission. That has to happen. But that can't be stopped because we say we're so inevitably, if we pass it after February 1st, we have to undo some of their work, reappoint them, do some kind of undoing, presumably more as time goes on. But the moment it's February the 1st, they are under an obligation to move forward, and therefore we cannot avoid but upset some of that work. Would that be a correct statement?
Yes. Yes, the commissions would have to restart their work if the royal assent is given to C20 anytime after February 8th.
Okay, all right. February 8th?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just trying to do the, following on Mr. Christopherson's observations about how things work in the Senate. I think that his statement that the Senate ought to be set aside as more aspirational. I know that's the long-standing position of the New Democrats, but it's of course not the way the law works here. And I don't think failing some kind of unanimous consent in the Senate to simply pass the bill in all its stages at one sitting, I actually don't think you can just rush something through the Senate with the kind of alacrity that Mr. Christopherson is suggesting, which makes me think that if we're heading down the direction of saying we need to have a larger number of witnesses and we want to accommodate them, I think the better direction would be not to try and have special sittings in January, but rather to have extra sittings in November right now, either in the evenings or on days we don't normally sit, something of that sort. I think that's the best way of accommodating these things, so we can still meet that kind of deadline. It's just a suggestion that I'm throwing out there. That, of course, wasn't meant for you, Mr. Méran. It was meant for our colleagues there. But I wanted to use your comments as a jumping-off point, and I thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Mr. McKenzie. Sorry.
Just a couple of questions, and they're not so much on all of these things, but you did indicate the need to appoint new returning officers. And I know that one of the things that occurred, and I think you in your document here have indicated that as of 2006, prior to 2006, there was certainly more, if you will, at the local political level in appointing returning officers. That's now an independent role fulfilled by your office, which I believe is giant light years ahead of the political interference. But when you do that appointing, is there a time limit? Is there an agreement that someone will be appointed? Is it appointment for life? Is it appointment for 10 years?
The appointment is for 10 years, provided that the returning officer continues to perform according to expectations. In the case of redistribution, however, if there's any change in the writing, the acts required that the RO there be a reappointment process. And there's an important provision in C20 that would facilitate the reappointment of well-performing returning officers.
So if C20 passes, we move into that. You're going to have to appoint 30 brand new people.
It's a little bit more than that. Our estimates is that by that time we would have to reappoint 120 returning officers. There's always a number, 30 or so that resign each year. Currently, we have suspended appointment in light of the redistribution process that will be taking place. There was no benefit in appointing ROs right now. We expect also that there may be, as a result of various circumstances, a number of ROs who would not be reappointed. So overall, we estimate that even with the change that's provided in C20, we would have to reappoint 120 ROs following the redistribution.
So would I be right or wrong in assuming that as of 2006, when you began the process, the people that were already returning officers, under what circumstances, were they appointed for a time limit?
They were appointed for 10 years.
Even prior to 2006?
In 2006, they had to be, following the changes in, I believe it's in the Accountability Act, the ROs started to be appointed on the basis of merit. And to facilitate the transition, there was a provision requiring the Chief Electoral Officer to consult with leaders of the political parties to see whether they had any reason not to continue those ROs who were already in place. So there was a bit of a transition there.
Yeah. And so if there are people at home that are interested in that position after the bill is passed, obviously Elections Canada will be going through a process.
Oh, yes. And the public one, there will be advertisement in the writings paper to draw attention to interested candidates.
And those folks should contact Elections Canada, not their local member. That's my point.
Yes. Would be nice to refer them to us.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We've used our time for today. We thank you for helping us with this process. We know that we will be seeing you some more through this process, hopefully at the launch of the commissions. We know you're there for our advice when we need you on this bill. So thank you very much. We'll suspend for our witnesses to leave, and then we will go in camera for committee business.